أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. لا أقسم بيوم القيامة ولا أقسم بالنفس اللوامة. أيحسب الإنسان أن لن نجمع عظامه بلى قادرين على أن نسوي بنانه بل يريد الإنسان ليفجر أمامه يسأل أيان يوم القيامة فإذا برق البصر وخسف القمر وجمع الشمس والقمر يقول الإنسان يومئذ أين المفر كلا لا وزر إلى ربك يومئذ المستقر ينبأ الإنسان يومئذ بما قدم وأخر بل الإنسان على نفسه بصيرة ولو ألقي مآذيره لا تحرك به لسانك لتجل به إن علينا جمعه وقرآنه فإذا قرأناه فاتبع قرآنه ثم إن علينا بيانه كلا بل تحبون العاجلة وتذرون الآخرة وجوه يومئذ ناظرة إلى ربها ناظرة ووجوه يومئذ باسرة تظن أن يفعل بها فاقرة كلا إذا بلغت التراقي وقيل مرحاق وظن أنه الفراق والتفت الساق بالساق إلى ربك يومئذ المساق فلا صدق ولا صلى ولكن كذب وتولى ثم ذهب إلى أهله يتمطى أولى لك فأولى ثم أولى لك فأولى أيحسب الإنسان أن يترك سدى ألم يكن طفة من ماء ثم كان علقة فخلق فسوى فجعل من الزوجين الذكر والأنثى أليس ذلك بقادر على أن يحيي الموتى صدق الله مولانا العظيم. السلام عليكم.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمد رسول الله. They say that the color of Mecca is red and the color of Medina is green. There are these balances in the places, and when you're there, you feel the different energies. And between them they purify you. And in Mecca you can raise your voice. When you're reciting the talbiyah, you can raise your voice. You can shout out Allahu Akbar. You can shout out Labaik, Labaik, Allahumma Labaik. But when you're in Medina, then it's a different adab. Because you're with your Prophet. And you can't raise your voice above the voice of the Prophet. And you have to be very meticulous in how you behave. And inshallah in the first talk I'll concentrate on Mecca. And inshallah later on this afternoon then I'll concentrate on talking about Medina. But you can never have one without the other. I mean, in a way you could say that Mecca is the place of haqiqah and Medina is the place of sharia. But you can't have one without the other. And even when you're in the place of haqiqah, you can only approach the haqiqah, the reality of Allah, by clinging to the sharia. And in the same way, when you're in Medina, in clinging to the sharia, if you don't have an awareness of the haqiqah, then something is missing. And you'll find yourself with a shell that has no meaning. So the relationship between the two is very intimate. There are different ways about going about the Hajj. In the Qur'an, the Muslims are described as the ones who say we hear and we obey. And so on a very basic level, you say, well, Allah's commanded that I go on Hajj, so I'm going on Hajj. But it's much more than that, because in it, you will find the meaning of your particular secret and your particular life, as well as life as a whole. And it very much wakes you up. We tend, as life goes on, to take things for granted. And when you go on the Hajj, you can't take anything for granted at all. And so it wakes you up. And it makes you aware that you're alive, and it makes you aware that you might die. When you reach Mecca, you find that after every fard prayer, there is a funeral prayer. Someone has died since the last time you prayed. And you join in the funeral prayer, and one day, you never know, it could be that people will be praying over you. And so this increases your awareness of being alive. And inshallah it increases your awe. Because people, when they've talked about taqwa, sometimes it's given a Christian translation of being pious, which kind of gives the impression of sort of being very holy, but that's not really what taqwa is about. I mean, taqwa, one aspect of it is being careful. Abu Hurairah said it's like if you're wearing a silham or a burnous and you're walking down a narrow path and there's thorn bushes on either side and you draw it in close so that you won't get snagged up on the thorns and so you can make your way through safely. This is one definition of taqwa from the time of the Prophet. And more recently I've heard it described as being in awe of Allah. And you look around you, you find yourself in this sea of existence, in the middle of this universe, in this galaxy of stars that are moving at incredibly fast speeds through great areas of space where there's absolutely nothing that you can see, and everything in complete balance, and you're like this little microdot on the face of one of these planets, and yet you have a destiny and a life and things happen to you. And the Hajj makes you aware of this, and it increases your awe of Allah. And this is really at the heart of the Hajj. If you look at the Surah of a Hajj, it's the only surah in the Qur'an that has 2 sajdas when you're reciting it. And the Hajj is very much like that, because when you finally arrive at Mecca and you finally see the black square of the Kaaba and the people going around it, and it takes your breath away and you say Subhanallah. And you go in and you begin the sa'i, so you begin the Tawaf. And at the end of the Tawaf, you have the 2 rakats at the Maqam Ibrahim, or you have to go back when in the Hajj time because it's so crowded. But it's a special sajda because you remember this is where Sayyidina Ibrahim did sajda. And this is where all the people who came after him did sajda, including the Prophet ﷺ. But then there's another sajda, because when you have completed the Hajj and you do the Tawaf al-Ifada, and again you do the 2 rakats after you've done the 7 circuits, then you'll find that your sajda is a different sajda, because something has happened to you in between the first sajda you did there and this one you're doing now. And it's a big thing. This change in inward awareness is a very big thing. This is part of the gift of Allah. And you will find that you're completely changed. And the Prophet ﷺ said that if you've done the Hajj correctly, that in an acceptable way, then you will be like the day you were born. And you can't have a heart that's purer than the heart of a newborn baby. You can't have a heart purer than that. So this is one of the rewards of Hajj, just in the dunya. And as Dr. Sultana has said, in the akhirah, then the promise of the Jannah. So it's a passport to Allah's fadl and Allah's rahmah. And so you have to treasure it and you have to look for it. And so it's important that when you set out on the Hajj, you have an expectation that these things are going to happen to you. That you are going to be changed, you are going to be transformed, you are going to have these rewards beyond what you can imagine. And I always ask Allah, I say, Allah, please give me more than what I'm asking for, more what I imagine what I'm asking for. Because your generosity is greater than what I imagine it to be. So give me more than what I want. And if you go with that expectation, then inshallah that is what you will have, because Allah said in the Hadith Qudsi, I'm in the expectation of my slave. Now this is what I've talked about here is the niyyah, but also you have to take very practical steps as well when you go on the Hajj. For example, you need to be fit. Suddenly you're going to be in a different climate. It depends. I was very fortunate the first time I went on Hajj because I travelled overland and I travelled for 3 months. So by the time we finally got to Mecca, we were fit. We were hardened from travelling. We were used to hardship. We were used to the climate. But for a lot of us now, we fly in and we fly out. And really our bodies don't have time even to acclimatise. I found usually when I'm travelling, if I go into a different climate, it takes at least 3 weeks, usually 6, to actually acclimatise to the climate. And when you go to a drier climate, your body dries out. To begin with, you sweat a lot and you drink a lot. And then gradually you dry out and your body readjusts. And then you don't have to drink so much and you're balanced in that situation. But for people like us coming from a cold climate, you suddenly fly into a hot climate. And it's made even more complicated because now they have lots of air conditioning, which in fact is quite a shock on your system. And although often it makes things more comfortable, it often plays havoc with your lungs. But if you can be fit before you go, if you can be walking regularly before you go, then when you come to the point where you have to do a lot of walking, your body's already prepared for it. Similarly with your shoes, it's best to have sandals. Certainly for the men, you shouldn't have anything that covers your feet, like khufs. If you can have sandals without stitching, that's even better, because the men, as far as the ihram is concerned, there shouldn't be anything stitched. So if you can get a molded plastic sandal rather than the flip-flop, then that's the best footwear. But then you have to make sure that your feet are used to that. So if you've worn them in before you go on the Hajj, you save yourself a lot of trouble, because I've seen people, they go and they put on brand new sandals, and after half a day they've got awful blisters and they have to keep moving and the blisters get worse and they're in agony, and with a bit of foresight they could have avoided that completely. So it's just very practical things that can make all the difference between a Hajj that is smoother than it, rather than being difficult just because you didn't think a bit about what you had to do. What you find also when you get to the Hajj is there's a lot of people there. You can't imagine it. I mean, after you've been in that crowd, any other crowd is small by comparison. If you find yourself in the rush hour in the underground in London, it's nothing. If you're walking down Oxford Street or any big street when everybody's out doing Christmas shopping or something, it's nothing compared to the Hajj. Nothing can prepare you for it, but you have to be very patient in it. If you lose your temper on the Hajj, you lose your Hajj. So you have to guard your own anger, and you have to protect yourself from other people's anger. And you actually have to, if you see someone beginning to get angry, you have to remind them and say, no, please, Hajj, don't get angry, don't lose your Hajj, calm down, it's all right. And this is something that you see happening on a big scale, and it's wonderful because, as the Prophet said, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the Muslims should be like two hands washing each other, and like the beams of the roof that support each other. And on the Hajj you see this happening, and it's extraordinary. It's not like any other gathering, because everybody there is there for the same reason. So it's a very unified event. When you're doing the Tawaf, there's a certain rhythm. It's like being in water. So there's a current of people. If you go too slowly, people will tread on your heels. If you go too fast, you'll tread on the person's heels in front of you. So you have to be very aware, you have to be present when you're doing the Tawaf, when you're doing the Sa'i. If you're distracted, if your attention goes, you'll find yourself either being bumped into or bumping into people. And also you find that there's currents of people. I mean, you find some people hold on to each other and they sort of go around in a big phalanx, and woe betide if you're in their path. So you have to be ready to give way. You have to be like the seaweed in the water, and when the current comes, you just move with it. If you're too rigid, you get knocked over. And you even see some people trying to do 2 rakats at the Maqam of Ibrahim, right at the Maqam of Ibrahim, right in the middle of the flow. And it's impossible, it's like King Canute telling the sea to go back. It just doesn't work, So you have to use your aql. And in all these things, you do what's possible. I mean, the sunnah is every time you start the Tawaf with kissing the black stone, and every time you come round you kiss the black stone, and before you go to do the Safa and Marwa you kiss the black stone. Well, in reality you can't do that on the Hajj, unless you've got a lot of time and a lot of patience, because there are just so many people all wanting to do the same thing. But one thing that happened to me was that before I set out on the Hajj, someone asked me to return a book for them in a mosque I didn't usually go to. It was on the other side of London, and I said, Bismillah, I'll do it for you. And I went there and returned the book to the Imam. And then I met a man from Liberia, old man, and when he learnt I was going on the Hajj, he said, oh, wonderful. And he started telling me about the Hajj. And he had this big bottle of the perfume they put on the black stone. He sort of took it out and covered me with it. So I already had a scent of where I was going to. It's like he was like a tracker dog almost. He said, this is the scent you have to follow. But one of the things he told me, he said, if you want to touch the black stone, if you want to kiss the black stone, don't fight. He said, if you fight for it, you'll lose your Hajj. He said, the way to do it is when you're doing the Tawaf, go as close as you can to the Yemeni corner, and then start approaching the black stone, which is the next corner along. And then he said, when you can't go any further because there's just too many people, then stop and ask Allah to take you there, and then don't do anything. And he said, Allah will take you there. And so I did it. And each of my tawafs, I'd begin and I'd end doing this. And every time I was taken to the black stone, the crush of people took me to the black stone. And in fact, the first time I was pushed right up against it. And it's hollowed out now because so many people have been kissing it. It's hollowed out, and so you can put your head right inside it. And I put my head right inside and kissed it. But then I was ready to move on, but I couldn't escape, because of the crush of people. So I was trying to there were all these people trying to get there, and I was trying to get away, and everyone was laughing, they thought it was very funny. So, this is the reality that you find again and again in the Hajj. If you ask Allah, whatever you need, ask Allah for it, and Allah will give it to you. You don't have to fight people for it, and whatever you want, even if it's to go to the toilet, you need to go to the toilet. And I found this on Arafah. Especially on that day of Arafah, it's a great day of mercy, and Suddenly I needed to go to the toilet, but I said, Allah, please, where's the toilet? Because this was sort of 23, 24 years ago now. They don't have all the I think there were less facilities then than they have now. And I just went out and looked for it, and immediately I came to one. So this is what it's like. Ask Allah for everything, and then you take this with you wherever you go in life. When you need something, you ask Allah for it, and then you look for it. And this is how to get gifts from Allah easily. It's like with the Safa and Marwa. Hagar, she ran between the two because she was looking for help. And the help she was looking for, she couldn't find it at either of these points. But then when she asked Allah for help, then the Zamzam flowed out. And it's interesting that, in fact, we do it the reverse. After you've completed the Tawaf and you've done the 2 rakats to the Maqam Ibrahim, then often it's customary to have some Zamzam before you do Safa and Marwa, because by then you're quite thirsty. So, we drink the Zamzam, we get the reward of Safa and Marwa even before we do it. But then we do Safa and Marwa because it reminds us of why we do it. We remember Hagar running between the two. And in fact, so much of the Hajj, it goes back to Sayyidina Ibrahim and to his family and to Ismail. And even when you're doing Tawaf, you'll notice that the Hijra, the curved wall after the black stone, the next corner round, and the door. Once you go around to the side that's opposite the side between the Yemeni corner and the black stone, there's the Hijra. Now they say that they're in fact buried within that area, but also it's the sunnah to go around that rather than through it, because there is a space that you can go through, because the Kaaba as it stands now is not built on the original foundations that Sayyidina Ibrahim built it on. But by going around the Hijra, you make sure that you go around the original foundations of the Kaaba as Sayyidina Ibrahim built it. So this is a thing to remember. The other thing to remember also is that you have to be in wudu for the Tawaf and for the Sa'i. Very important. And really, if you can, you're in wudu all the time. I mean, if you find, there's a time when you've completed the obligatory rites, but you're in the haram, and really if you break wudu, you should go and do wudu again straight away. It's because it's a place of great barakah. You can't imagine the blessing, but when you're there, the rest of the world disappears. You can't think of anywhere that you'd rather be. And part of the adab and part of the courtesy is just to be in wudu. I mean, another very practical thing is have somewhere to put your sandals when you come into the mosque. And you'll find some people have a plastic bag and they take them with them. Often it helps if you have a plastic bag or something that you can just slip them in and then put them somewhere unobtrusive. And inshallah they'll still be there when you get back. But if they've gone, there's usually piles and piles of sandals that have been abandoned, so you have to make do with what there is. But with a bit of foresight again, you can keep the shoes or sandals that your feet are used to, and they'll be where you put them when you come back. Again, there's in terms of passing in front of other people's qibla, there's a different adab than there usually is in the mosque, either in Medina or any other mosque, in that you can go much closer to people who are praying and pass in front of them, because there's so many people praying and doing nawafil that if you waited, there'd just be this almighty traffic jam. So as long as you don't pass directly in front of someone, if you leave the space open where they'll be going into sajda, you can pass in front of them even though they're praying. But again, you're as unobtrusive as you can be. You don't, if you can, then you don't even go that close. But it is a different adab in Mecca. As I was saying earlier on, I'll just backtrack a bit, but when you set out, it's also wise to set out with what you can carry. You have to remember that you will be carrying luggage. It's going to be hot, and therefore don't take more than you can take it with ease. Because again, otherwise you're just putting a burden on yourself, or if you expect other people to do it for you, you're putting a burden on them. Travel light. I've always found with traveling that what you need is where you go to. You don't have to take the whole world with you. And the sunnah with traveling is you have the clothes you're wearing, one in the wash and one ready to put on. You just need 3 sets of clothes. If you need special medication, take it. It's usually quite wise to bring something for stomach upset, because you're going to be going into a place where the food is different and the water is different. And unless you have a strong constitution, maybe your stomach's going to have a few complaints about it. So if you have something like Collis Brown's, or whatever you take for an upset stomach, it's quite useful, because even if you don't need it, you can bet your life someone else will. But again, don't take a whole medicine chest. Obviously, you need your ihram as well. You need to know before you set out all the things that you have to do, so that when you go there, you know what you have to do, and within what time parameters. I mean, having said that, if you read in the Muwatta, the Prophet ﷺ was very generous about the order that you did things in, and people would come and they say, "Oh dear, I've cut my hair before I did the sacrifice," or I went and did the Tawaf al-Ifada before I cut my hair, and he'd say, "Never mind, just do it. Don't worry about it." So there are these different elements in the Hajj, but there is leeway within them. But again, you have to know basically what you're doing, and then you can deal with the unforeseen, because there will be the unforeseen. There will be the delays when you get to Jeddah. There will be just the sheer weight of people, which means you can't go from A to B in 10 minutes. It's going to take you an hour. There are going to be the times when you're thirsty or hungry and there isn't anything to eat, there isn't something to drink at hand, and you have to have sabr. But at least if you know what you've got to do next, then you just work your way through the Hajj. And really it's very simple. You go with that, Allahu Akbar, you go with that niyyah. You go, really once you've made the intention to go on Hajj, then really you say every step I make is on the way to Hajj now. So for example, inshallah, I'm going on the Hajj with my wife this Hajj, coming Hajj. So already we're saying, well, our journey to Glasgow, that we're on our way to Hajj, so it all counts. Every step. It's a bit like when you're going to the Juma. The Prophet said, someone lived on the outskirts of Medina, and he said, it's quicker to get to the Juma. And the Prophet said, no, stay where you are, because you get a reward with every step you take to the Juma. So the longer you have to come, the more barakah and the more hasanah you have. And so it's like that with the Hajj. Once the intention is there in your heart, everything you do, you're preparing for it. When you finally, inshallah, get to the point where you have to put on ihram, then the sunnah is to have a ghusl, and this is after a prayer, either the fard or the nawafil prayer. A ghusl, put on the ihram, and do 2 rakats, and then really you make that intention. You say, now I'm in ihram to do the Hajj, and then you specify which Hajj, whether it's the ifrad or qiran or tamattu. And again, you have to be clear of the requirements for which particular one you're doing. Know what you're doing. And then you make your way to Mecca. And really, as soon as you can, you make your way to the haram. And my understanding is that you can go through any of the gates, but if you go through the Bab al-Salam, this is the best gate to go through. And when you see the Kaaba, subhanAllah, you have some prayer. And the thing is also that once you put the ihram on for the Hajj, then you begin the talbiyah. But when you get to the haram and you begin the sa'i, then you stop the talbiyah. While you're doing the tawaf and the Safa and Marwa, then you don't do the talbiyah. It's a different dhikr. And as Dr. Sultana said, between the Yemeni corner and the black stone, it's the sunnah to repeat the ayah which begins Rabbana atina fi dunya hasanatan wa fil akhirati hasanatan wa qina adhaban nar, and then it goes on. I can't remember it now actually, but it ends up ma'al abrar. You're asking Allah for the shade of the Jannah. So that's part of the ayah, and you'll find it in one of the early surahs, towards the end of the surah. But the rest of the tawaf, you can be doing any dhikr, but it's to do with glorification of Allah. So it's La ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar. There are many dhikrs that you can do. The Prophet ﷺ said, if you were doing tawaf in a state of forgetfulness, you would be like wading. It would be like wading in a sea of mercy. And he said, if you do the tawaf with attention and with dhikr, then with every step, Allah gives you 10 good actions and takes away 10 wrong actions. So already the process of purification has begun. And you're being washed clean without even realizing it. It's almost like atomic radiation. You can't see it, you can't feel it, you can't touch it, but it's working on you. And this is the whole process throughout the Hajj. So if you can, at least kiss the black stone once. It depends on each person's capacity. But certainly, I mean, you're following the advice of the Haji from Liberia. You can do it as many times as you want without difficulty, inshallah. Then the 2 rakats of, once you've finished the tawaf, the 2 rakats at the maqam of Ibrahim, and being realistic, you line it up. You see the enclosure where the stone is that has the impression of Sayyidina Ibrahim's feet, and if you can, you have a look, and there are these 2 big footmarks in the stone. So he obviously was a tall, large man. And then you go back and back and back until you're out of the main flow of the tawaf, and you find a space you can do your 2 rakats. Then Zamzam. Then Sa'i, Safa and Marwa. And for the men, just going back, for the men when you're doing the tawaf, it's the sunnah to do the first 3 quickly, and then slow down for the last 4. For the women, you don't have to do that. Similarly with Safa and Marwa, there is this point which is now kind of marked with this sort of neon green lights, something that's crept in over the years. But in that time, you hurry up. The men hurry up, they speed up. But again, for the women, it's not necessary. And after that, it depends when you arrive in Mecca, but you can do as many tawaf as you want. But the sunnah is that after each 7, then you do 2 rakats. But you can do it as much as you want. But the Prophet ﷺ said even to look at the Kaaba is ibadah. And so part of the courtesy is you never turn your back on the Kaaba. Even when you're leaving, you shouldn't actually turn around and just walk. You should almost be looking at it until it's out of sight. This is the adab. When the time comes to go to Mina, if you can, you should be there by Dhuhr. This is on the 8th of Dhul Hijjah. If you can be there by Dhuhr. Sometimes you find people are still leaving much later than that. But certainly by nightfall, or by the night, at the very latest you should be there at night. But the sunnah is to be there for Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, Isha, and Subh the next day. And again, the sunnah is to wait until sunrise and then make your way to Arafah. Again, if you're fit, it's easier to walk because there's so many vehicles that it's a traffic jam. I mean, in the time of the Prophet ﷺ and the early generations, they used to do it on camelback. But obviously, those days are gone now, until we ran out of petrol. But it's such a traffic jam that it's easier to walk. It's not far. To walk from out of Mecca into Mina, it's 3 miles. It's not a lot if you take it easy. From Mina to Arafah, again, it's not far. But you'll find with each of you it's different. Sometimes you say, no, I'm taking the bus, there's a lift and there's a clear space, so you say, yes, thank you. It's different for everyone. But the extraordinary thing on the Hajj is all the people you meet during the Hajj, because out of the 3 million, for each of you, Allah arranges meetings with certain people. And they're not by accident, they're not by chance. And so part of your meaning is who you meet, and then you're part of other people's meaning, the ones, for you meeting them. So always be awake, always be conscious, because nothing happens by accident. And when you arrive at Arafah, the sunnah there is you join Dhuhr and Asr. I mean, again, in the early times, there was an imam leading the Hajj, and everyone would travel as a group, and they would all pray Dhuhr and Asr together. I mean, now there's just so many people. I mean, I think they're expecting about 3 million this year. So when I went in 1977, it was 1.5 million. So already it's doubled in that time. It's impossible for everyone to be doing everything at exactly the same time. So when you get to that point, then you pray Dhuhr and Asr, and then you make your way to the plain itself, and if you can, to the Jabal al-Rahma. Now the Jabal al-Rahma is just a small hill, really, and so it's impossible for all 3 million people to be standing on it at the same time. But I mean, the lesson I learned in the Hajj was ask Allah, and Allah will take you there. And we asked Allah, I said, please Allah, we must stand on the Jabal al-Rahma. And they were trying to direct the flow it was like a big sort of traffic flow, and they had this huge big sort of system of shepherding people around, which would have taken hours, and then we saw this tent that no one was in, and we said, I wonder if there's a way through there. And we went into the tent, and then it was open on the other side, and we went through the other side, and there we were on the Jabal al-Rahma, so you got a nice shortcut in. So you have to take these moments, you have to be bold. The Prophet ﷺ told the story of 3 men who came to the mosque, and one was crowded, and one came to the door, and he saw a space right near the Prophet, and he made his way and he sat there. And another man came in, and he saw it was crowded, and he just managed to sit on the edge, just inside the mosque. Another man came and he looked at this crowd, and he thought it's crowded, and he went off. So these are the 3 ways you can deal with the situation. But for the strong mu'min, you go for the best. And if you have that expectation of Allah, then Allah will give it to you. Allah will make a way for you. And on Arafah, it's the time when you're with your Lord. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, Hajj is Arafah. So it's a time of intimacy. It's a time when you're completely alone. Whoever you love, whatever your business, it's all gone. It's as if you're on the Qiyama. It's like a preparation for the Qiyama. Because wherever you look, there's people standing dressed the same. And just for this time. So it's a special time. It's a time for asking for everything. But be careful of what you ask. Don't just ask for the dunya, and don't just ask for the akhirah. You can ask for the things you want in the dunya. You can ask for the garden. But then you start asking for other people, and then but then it comes to what's deep in your heart, because your secret, it's like Allah said in the Hadith Qudsi, the whole universe cannot contain me, but the heart of the mu'min contains me. So in everybody's heart is this great secret, and you have access. This is your means to access of knowledge of Allah. And there's the ayah in the Qur'an that says, they will ask you about the ruh. So you've only been given a little knowledge of it. But there is knowledge of the ruh to which people have access. Now, some hardliners will say, oh no, you can't know anything about the ruh at all. They misinterpret the ayah, but that little, in fact, is vast. And that little, in fact, is your taste of what the Prophet was given on the Isra wa Miraj. Because it says he drew closer, 2 bows' lengths or nearer. And what is the meaning of that? In the old times, the nearest anyone could approach a king was 2 bows' lengths. So it's a way of saying he approached as close to the king as he could, not in physical, spatial terms, but in terms of intimacy and unveiling and knowledge, marifah. So this is something to ask for on the Yawm al-Arafah. This is something to desire. And we must remember that at the end of the Isra when the Prophet was given, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was the prayer. And in the prayer is the sajda. And what is the sajda but knowing that you are the slave and Allah is the Lord? And so, as I was saying earlier on, in the Surah Al-Hajj there are 2 sajdas. And in your Hajj you'll find there are 2 sajdas. You know, the first one and the last one, they will not be the same. And people say that there are people whose heart is always in sajda. Even when they come out of sajda, their heart remains in sajda. So this is a station to seek and to long for. Because if your heart is always in sajda, then it means that you have reached ihsan. Because ihsan, as we know, the Prophet ﷺ said it is to worship Allah as though you see Him. And although you don't see Him, you know that He sees you. So that having a heart in sajda means you are aware of the presence of Allah. Not just when you're doing the prayer, but all the time in between. And if you're in a state of dhikr, that means you're in a state of remembrance, you're in a state of dhikr of Allah throughout your waking moments. And this is something to aim for. Shaykh Muhammad Habib in his diwan, he says Allah will ask you about every breath, so fill it with dhikr of Allah. These are the things to be asking for on Arafah. And then you'll ask for things that no one else will ever know about, because as my Shaykh said, there are some things you can talk about and some things you mustn't talk about, which are to do with your own particular secret. So there you're with your Lord and you ask. And in time people find out a bit of what you ask, but some things no one will know what you ask except for Allah. And then it's like time stands still, and you find on that day there's a tremendous rahmah, even if it's hot, there's a coolness in the air. And in the Muwatta, there's a riwayah that says, the Prophet ﷺ said, on this day, Shaytan there's no day in which he's more outcast and more rejected and more angry, because he sees the rahmah of Allah descending on the Hujjaj and he can't do anything to stop it. Shaitan's completely helpless in that day. And he said the only other day like it was the day of Badr. And the companion said, why was that? And he said, well, didn't he see Jibreel arranging the angels, in formation to finish off the kafirun? And again, Shaitan could do nothing about that. So these are special days. And taste it. When you're on Arafah, taste it, because it's just really an afternoon that you're there. And then as soon as Maghrib, you move to Muzdalifah. And once you're there, then you pray Maghrib and Isha together, travelling prayers, shortened prayer. And Muzdalifah is an extraordinary place, because it's one of those places where you're neither here nor there. And you try and, there are all these people and you're all trying to find somewhere comfortable for the night, and there's nowhere comfortable. And, I heard that since I was last there, they've covered a lot of it with concrete, which makes it even worse than the desert, because concrete is very hard. But I remember when we were there, it was just desert, scrappy, just a few bushes here and there, and we said, oh, there's a place, and we go there, and it's not very good. Oh, there's a place over there, and you go there, it was just the same. And how about over there? And then they said, look, hang on, look, there's space for us here. We'll just rest here, and that's it. And it's like the dunya, you keep on looking for somewhere better, but you won't find it. So just find a spot where there's room for you to lie down and stop there, do the prayer. If you have food with you, share it. We were very fortunate because near us was a Saudi family, and it got very cold that night, and 2 hours before dawn we couldn't sleep because it was too cold, and they had a fire, and they invited us over and gave us coffee, and so they made it sweet for us. And these are the things that happen there. You always find that in that situation the strong woman looks after the other ones who are not so fortunate or who are not so strong. And so if you're in a position of strength, then help people. But get what rest you can, because already you're tired. But tomorrow you're going to get even tireder. So get what rest you can. And if you're cold, then huddle together. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, huddle together so that mercy will grow between you. And this is something you can do. Obviously the men with the men and the women with the women. Because when you're in ihram, then there is a certain adab. So even if you're husband and wife, there is an adab, there's a barrier between you. And also at Muzdalifah, it's very important that you gather the stones to stone the Shaytans. And they say that this is one of the miracles of the Hajj, that all these pebbles are gathered by the Hujjaj, and in the next 4 days they're thrown at the Shaytans. But you never see this big pile of stones. And they say that it's the angels come and take them away. There's always pebbles for you to pick up at Muzdalifah. Although if they've concreted it over, it's going to be a bit more difficult. So inshallah they've left some there. But this is the sunnah, find your pebbles there for stoning the Shaytans. And you need 7 for the day of the Eid. And then you need 21 for each day that you're going to be in Mina after. And you'll be either 2 days there or 3 days. So according to how many days you intend to be in Mina, get the right number of pebbles. And find a place that you can keep them securely. The sunnah is for the men is to wait until subh, fajr, before you move on back to Mina. But as a dispensation, the women and the children and people who are old can leave early, so that they get there before the main crowd gets there. And when you leave, again, it's a big crowd, and it takes time. I mean, when we went, the family who'd given us coffee and food offered a lift, and we said, Bismillah, thank you. They had a van, and we sort of leapt in, but it was so slow that in the end we got out. We said, we'll walk, it's quicker. And so we walked, and we got to the big Shaitan, and it's a lot of people in not very much space. And if you're in a group, always arrange a place to meet, because it's extraordinary that it's like, as I said, it's like being in water, and you get pulled this way and that, and it's very easy to get separated. It's the same, in fact, when you're in the haram in Mecca. Always have a place that you'll meet. If you're with people, say, well, we'll meet at such and such a place. I mean, for example, we always agreed to meet opposite the golden drain pipe, that's off the roof of the Kaaba. We say opposite that, back in the mosque, we'll meet there. But have a place to meet. Same when you come to stone the Shaitan, have a place further back where you'll meet. Otherwise you'll get separated and you'll never find each other again. But if that happens, then don't panic, because you're with Allah, and you're not going to get lost. Everyone's going in the same direction as you are. So, you don't, if you do get separated, you don't have to go into a panic. You say, MashaAllah, we'll meet up when we do. And instead you meet this one and that one. And as I said, the meetings that Allah has arranged happen. But you find in the Hajj you can't hold on to anything or anyone. It's just... And when you come to stone the big Shaitan, if you get too close, you'll find pebbles coming into the back of your head. If you start throwing when you're too far back, you'll be hitting someone else in front of you. So you have to get to the right distance where your pebbles will reach their target without causing harm. And the secret of the stoning the Shaitan, because some people, they think that this stone edifice is the Shaitan, and they get really angry, and some people get their slippers and start bashing it, but it's not Shaitan, it's I mean, what I understand is that by the light of the Hajj and by the light of the Yawm al-Arafah, inwardly you see how Shaitan has got to you one way or another. If he made you angry this, if he made you want that, if he made you go into the doubtful here. And so with each way that you see that Allah's got to you, you cast it out with the stone. Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, and it's like you're saying, you're not going to get me that way again. So this is part of your purification. So again, you have to be aware. You have to be aware of yourself. You have to be aware of what's in your heart. And if you've been covering up things in your heart, then this is the time to uncover it. Because there's outward kufr and there's inward kufr. And it's like an illness, and it's sometimes an illness that even if you're Muslim, you still suffer from it. So this is the time to be cured of that illness. And this is part of the secret of the days of Tashriq, that each day, on the Eid day, you just do the big shaitan. On the next days, you do all three. And it's the sunnah with the lesser two to pause after you've thrown the stones and to make dua. Not with the big one, but with the other two. So you have to be aware throughout the Hajj of what you're doing. And it's part of the purification, and it's part of being aware of what has been happening to you. Also, bear in mind that where does this come from? Where does the sunnah of stoning the shaitans come from? It comes from when Sayyidina Ibrahim had the dream, which he interpreted that he had to sacrifice his son Ismail. And so he said, as we know from the Qur'an, he said to Ismail, I have to, this is the dream I've had. And Ismail said, well, Bismillah, then do it. But at that time, Shaitan came to Ibrahim and to Hagar and to Ismail, and he was saying, no, you can't do this. So he said to Ibrahim, he said, that's not what the dream meant, you don't have to do it, he's your son. And Ibrahim said, A'udhu billahi min shaitan rajim, and he threw stones at him. And then, so he went to Hagar and he said, he's your firstborn, you can't let your husband do this. What kind of a husband would do this? And she said, A'udhu billahi min shaitan rajim, threw stones at him. And then Shaitan came to Ismail and said, why have you agreed to this? You're young, you've got your whole life ahead of you. It doesn't make sense, it's stupid. And he's just a small boy. A'udhu billahi min shaitan rajim, threw at him. So this is why there's 3 shaitans that you say. So you remember that, and it's the same. Then you relate it to your life, because there are situations when you know what you have to do, and for one reason or another it's not particularly pleasant, and shaitan comes to you and he says, well, you don't really need to, forget it, and in those moments you have to say, A'udhu billahi minash shaitan rajim. So that's part of the meaning of what you're doing then. And then after you've coming back to the day of the Eid, if you're going to make a sacrifice, make a sacrifice. If you're going to, and then once you've done that, for the men, shave your head. And there's dispensation. It's better to shave it completely, but you can just have it cut shorter. But I find that if you have it shaved completely, it's part of really separating yourself from the dunya, and it's a separation from what you had before. It's a separation from the world that you left when you entered ihram. Because when you come out of ihram, the world is never going to be the same again. And when you come back to your home, inshallah, and your life is never going to be the same again. And somehow it helps to make that separation. It's almost like for the men's circumcision, that when whatever that is, that sunnah, a change happens in your being. A change happens in your being. So, if you think, well, what are the people back at work going to say? It doesn't matter. My advice is shave your head completely. And then you go down into Mecca for the Tawaf al-Ifada, for the final Tawaf. And again the 2 rakats and the sa'i, and then you're done. And then you can come out of ihram. You can bathe and put on perfume. If you're married, you can have sexual intercourse with your wife. So you're out of ihram. You've done it. You've completed the Hajj. But you have to go back to Mina before Maghrib if you can. But certainly to spend the night there, and then the next 2 days or the next 3 days. And these days are special because all you have to do in those days is after the sun has passed its meridian, go and stone the shaitans. That's all you have to do at Mina. But in fact you do much more, because it's a time for reflection. It's a time for looking at what's happened to you in the Hajj. It's a time really for measuring your life. Because in a way, while you're disconnected from what you've been connected to before you came, you can look at your life so far. You can look at what you want to do with it. It's a limited ajal, limited time span. You don't know when it's going to end. So you have to say, well, what's really important? What do I have to do? And part of it must be that you say, well, what have I done to establish the deen? If I'm living in the land of the kuffar, what have I done to establish the deen? And what am I going to do on my return? Because just as every breath you have to account for, your actions you have to account for, and there's nothing better than to lift the banner of Islam high. There's nothing better than establishing the prayer and the zakat, and as much of the deen as you can. And if you come out of the Hajj with that intention, it's a good intention to have. But especially the Ayyam Tashriq, they're days to reflect on what has happened, because you're no longer the same beastie, before you went into ihram. You're a different person, and you'll never be the same again. And these are precious times, because once you're on the move again, whether you're going back or you're going to Medina or wherever, things will begin to fade in your memory. Although you'll find with the Hajj that it will never leave you. And you remember things very clearly. But this is the time for the dye to become fixed. The dye of the Hajj, and its light, its nur, to become fixed. The Hajj is an extraordinary thing, and part of the miracles is you see that however many people are there, they all get fed. They all have something to drink. They all have somewhere to sleep, whether it's in the Hilton or in the street. Whether it's in, some people, they just live in the haram. And in spite of all the controls, I met one man in Pakistan, and he'd been on Hajj 3 times by foot without a passport. And he was just glowing with light. He was a tremendous man. And you meet people like this. You see extraordinary people. You really see what people can be. And you see sometimes these old men, but they're sailing around the Kaaba like a ship, and no one is bumping into them. And they have like this kind of buffer of barakah and light, and they just sail around. And you think, God, who's that? And you see these wonderful people. But then you see everybody's wonderful. No, it can't be that anyone who's there is beloved of Allah, including you. So have a good opinion of yourself, and a good opinion of others, and a good opinion of Allah. And the Prophet said these are the 2 best things. Have a good opinion of the slaves of Allah, and have a good opinion of Allah. And especially in the Hajj, you have to have this, because you'll see people doing really stupid things. Some people are very wise and some people are ignorant. So you will see ignorant things happening, but then you lower your eye. Look to the good and avoid abiding on things that aren't quite right. And if you can, put them right. And another miracle of the Hajj is that the Zamzam never runs out. The flow increases, and everyone gets to drink it. And another miracle is that you see the doves circling the Kaaba, but you never find a dropping. Ever. It's not like Trafalgar Square. So, if Ken Livingstone could discover the secret of Mecca, then he wouldn't have any worries in Trafalgar Square. But it's another story. But it is quite extraordinary, because you see these doves circling, and it's very beautiful. They're doing Tawaf, and the angels are doing Tawaf, and the people are doing Tawaf. And if you can, stop at Al-Multazam, which is the place between the black stone and the door of the Kaaba. Make du'as there, because it said whatever you ask for, Allah will grant it. So it's another place for making du'as. And remember that, as I said, you can do as many tawaf as you want. You do what's obligatory to satisfy the conditions of Umrah or Hajj and Umrah, whatever combination you're doing. But the nawafil, you can do as much as you can, so don't waste your time. There's a time when you go shopping and you want to get things, you want perfume or gold or clothes or whatever, but you're there for a limited time. Spend the time in the haram, doing tawaf, doing nawafil, reciting Qur'an, because this is part of your transformation. And treasure it, and don't waste a second. And you'll find the best time is 2 hours before dawn. If you're there 2 hours before dawn until subh, this is a special time, because Allah said, the Prophet said, Allah descends to the lowest heaven the last third of the night, and He says, which of my slaves are calling on me? So if you imagine that in the time of the Hajj, at Multazam, this is a special time to be asking Allah for things and making dua. So again, you have to be awake. And then, if you can, there are places to see. If you can go to Jebel Nur, where the Prophet received the first revelation. There are the mosques of Bilal and Sayyidina Umar. These places. I mean, a lot of the traces of the companions have been knocked down by the Wahhabis because they say it's a bidah, and then they put up their own buildings in their place and named it after themselves. And somehow they think this is different. But there's a secret, as Dr. Sultana said, in being in the places where the prophets have been and the companions have been, where the awliya and the salihin have been, because you get a taste of their light. And it's like when you kiss the black stone. Sayyidina Umar said, I'm only kissing you because I saw the Prophet kissing, otherwise I wouldn't bother. He was very jalal, but the secret of it is that by this act all the Muslims throughout the ages are united. So everyone has been to this one meeting point. So it has a big secret. And treasure the company you're in. And I remember when I was very young, I read a saying that said, life is a journey, so make the most of the company in which you find yourselves. So inshallah, I'll stop speaking about Mecca now. Inshallah, later on in the afternoon, we'll talk about Medina. But I think now, inshallah, Dr. Yassin will be talking, and he'll listen to him carefully, because he will be giving you clear guidance about the parameters, of what you must do, of what you can do, of what you mustn't do, of what you should avoid, of what you should look for. And this is very important, because I said at the beginning that Mecca is a place of haqiqah and a place of la ilaha illallah and Allahu Akbar, but there is an adab to it. It's like the haqiqah is like the electric current, but it has to be insulated. Otherwise you short circuit and you fuse and you blow up. So there's an incredible energy, but to handle it, you have to have the insulation of the Sharia and the Sunnah. And inshallah, he will be defining, this is how to do it, this is how not to do it, this is how the Prophet did it. And in that is a clear guidance. Thank you. Sorry, could you just repeat that?
She's asking about how your actual journey to Makkah, because you undertook the traditional method of going
yes.
on foot. Could you give us a short description of that?
Well, it was funny because my teacher, Shaykh Abdul Marabit, he said one day I'd been working with Colonel Rahim on writing Blood on the Cross. So we'd been cooped up and doing a lot of a lot of academic work, if you like, and the Sheikh came to visit and have tea, and he said, "What do you want?" And I said, "I want to go on Hajj by foot. I just wanted space." And he said, "No, it'll take too long." And I thought that was that. And then, within 3 weeks, he sent us off, party of 3 of us. And he said, go to. It was even before Ramadan. He said, go to Sudan before you go on the Hajj and visit the awliya there and do lots of dhikr. And so we set off, and we didn't have any money. And someone gave us enough money to get a ticket as far as Athens. And we actually went off, and I had £20, which in those days was enough to get a taxi from the Athens airport into Athens and pay for a hotel room for one night and breakfast. And then we had nothing. And just the intention to go on the Hajj. And it's a long story, but we went to the Central Park, and then the time for Dhuhr came. And there was a hose pipe there, so we started doing wudu, much to the park attendant's anger, because he was a Greek and not a Muslim. And then we did the prayer, which made him even more angry. And he was sort of jumping about, trying to stop us, and we just carried on. But then a Sudanese man who was living in Athens was walking by, saw us doing the prayer and waited, and then invited us back to eat. And there was a whole group of Sudanese men there, and one of them had to go off to work, and we said, "Oh, can you get work here?" And he said, "Yeah." And we said, "Can you find a job for us? Because we need to get the money to get across to Alexandria." So we got a job in the factory there, and then one thing led to another. At the factory, we met a man, another Sudanese man, who invited us to stay with him at his house, because he said it. And then when he invited us, he said, "It's extraordinary. 3 months ago, I had this dream. I had 3 foreigners suddenly coming and staying at my house, and now I understand the meaning of the dream because you're here." So the whole journey was like that. Although we had nothing, Allah gave us everything, and we made our way eventually to Alexandria, and then down. We visited the Sheikh Shazali, who's in the middle of nowhere in the desert, and then down into Sudan, travelled around Sudan, and eventually got across to Jeddah. And I have written a book about it called The Difficult Journey, which inshallah captures something of it. But there's not really time now to describe the whole journey. I mean, all I can say is that it was really one miracle after another, and we really were exposed to the generosity of Allah in an extraordinary way. And the thing that I found was that we had to hide our need. So if we hadn't eaten for a day and we didn't have anywhere to stay, and someone would come up and say, "Do you need anything?" We said, "No, alhamdulillah, everything's fine." And then someone else would come along and say, "Oh, come to my house and have a meal." And then he'd say, "Why don't you stay the night?" And so all our needs were met without us having to expose our need. And it's something the Prophet said about poverty. He said, if it's hidden, if it's concealed, it's beautiful. And if it's exposed, it's ugly. And this was the secret we found, that, we set out because the Prophet ﷺ said, if you do 5 prayers a day, then Allah will feed you and clothe you and shelter you. And so we said, okay, on that basis, we'll set out on the Hajj and we'll do 5 prayers a day, and then Allah has to keep His promise, and He did. But there's more than one way of doing the Hajj. There were times when it was very difficult, but also times of great ease as well. So it was hardship, ease. But I think also being realistic, sometimes there's not the time for people to make the Hajj in that way, and you can fly in, fly out, and do it in 3 weeks or 2 weeks, or whatever. And that's perfectly acceptable. And the heart of the Hajj is in those 5 days. When you set out on the 8th of Dhul-Hijjah, the heart of it is in that. So you don't have to have a huge, big, sort of overland journey on foot beforehand. I think in the end you follow your heart and you do what's possible. You do what you can in the constraints. Obviously, yes, different people need different degrees of comfort. Back in '77 I was younger and stronger, and I didn't have a wife, and so it was a different situation. Inshallah this year I'm going with my wife, and we're going by air, and inshallah we'll have somewhere to stay. Although we haven't actually organised anything yet, but again, Allah is very generous, and He makes Hajj possible in many different ways. So it's, but it was an extraordinary way to do it. I always wanted another way was to do it, because I used to do the Hajj from Marrakesh by camel and cross the whole of North Africa, and I would love to do the Hajj like that, but maybe we'll have to wait until the petrol's run out, as I said earlier.
Brother, you mentioned that inshallah you will go back. Could we just perhaps connect, is there anything regarding the Mecca part of Hajj that you felt you would like to do again, or perhaps you would like to explore more around Mecca that maybe taking you back there again?
Well, there's 2 things. Firstly, when I went on Hajj in '77, I actually asked, one of the things I asked Allah was to have 3 Hajjs. One when I was young, one when I was middle-aged, and inshallah one when I was old, if I was allowed to live that long. And so inshallah this is my middle-aged Hajj now. So already I'm asking Allah, that I look, it's like a midpoint in life, and so I'm asking Allah to show the meaning really of what's happened so far and what's ahead. So that's internally. Externally, I haven't been up Jabal Nur. I'd love to do that. Although there's probably 2 million other people who also want to do it. So, and usually it's a thing that's good to do if you go on Umrah outside the Hajj season, and then there's less of a pressure. again, some of the mosques, I didn't have time to visit because when we went there, we were delayed. We didn't get into Mecca until the morning of the 8th of Dhul-Hijjah. So we literally arrived just in time. We were held up in Jeddah for 2 days because we didn't have any money in. They said, this is not good. But I quoted the ayah because the ayah says when you go on Hajj, take provision, and the best provision is taqwa. So I said, well, inshallah, we've got lots of taqwa, so you have to let us go. So in the end, they said go, and but because of that, we didn't have much. There was no time to look around before. We just did the rites, and then we were off to Mina. And then after the Hajj was over, we had 2 days, and then we were off up to Medina. So I didn't really have time to look around Mecca at all. And inshallah, this time we're doing it the other way around. We're going to Medina first, inshallah, and then doing the Hajj, and then we'll have a few days in Mecca. So I'd like to see the places I didn't see. But again, as I was saying earlier, the niyat is still to spend most of the time in the haram, at the Kaaba, inshallah.
Just to top up the question, could we in any way connect with the context of Mecca in a way that when we enter Mecca, we could perhaps follow the same physical and mental route that the Sahaba and Prophet arrived in?
Well, you probably can't follow the same physical route, but because a lot of buildings have been knocked down and things aren't the same anymore. But I think the things you can remember the things when you're in these places, depending on your knowledge of the Surah, you can say, this is where this happened, this is where this happened. So it brings it alive, and it's interesting that the way that the conquest of Mecca happened. Because when they first went to Medina, then the Munafiqun said, well, the strong will overcome the weaker. And then Allah revealed the ayah saying how right you are. The stronger will definitely overcome the weaker.